I'm really excited that you were here and you're interested in joining this special presentation. Um, I'm always excited to discuss the history and folklore of New Mexico. And now it's awesome because I get an opportunity to do that in a manner and in an environment that is awesome because now we have um, Halloween coming up and it's supposed to be the spooky time. And so I said, you know what? Let me just go ahead and make it open for the public so that everybody can enjoy this. I've been doing something similar to this for the last like 12 years for schools and for my students, and so having the opportunity to do it now is even uh, more awesome. And so what I'm going to do is I want to throw some stuff out there first. Please, I have everybody muted as they're coming in, but if you can please make sure that you keep your mic muted while the presentation's going on would be very much appreciated. I will allow for questions and stuff like that while we're doing this, and so I look forward to hearing from y'all too. The other thing I wanted to talk about was I'm lucky enough to do this because of the organizations I work into, and I've had amazing support through these organizations. So first is, like I said, Career Enrichment Center. I am the department chair for the Ethnic Studies department, um, and that's a whole amazing thing going on over there with us. And then I'm also a sponsor for the ECA Dream Team, who is bringing this to you directly today. We're a great organization where our students are fighting against injustices and social injustices going on in the United States and the world. And so, I'm proud to be a part of that. And then, like I said, I am a professor at the University of New Mexico through Chicana Chicano Studies Department, and like always we always bring it and we always have some quality presentations and quality uh, connections to the community. And so I thank all three of those groups for allowing me to be part of them, and also for them being a part of my journey. Okay, so let's get started. Now, I'm going to tell you a few things regarding some of the stuff I'm going to share with you today. Now, I'm going to be talking a lot about some of the stuff in New Mexico. I'm going to try to go to different areas around the state because a lot of people don't know we have some pretty interesting stuff here in regard to the paranormal and folklore. And so I'll discuss a lot of that stuff, obviously. But I just want to throw this out here. I'm not even scratching the surface. So I went ahead and included places that I have had personal experience with, or I've heard stories about too, that I want to share with everybody. Um, so I know probably some of your abuelitas' houses are haunted, or your house is haunted. And I'm sorry if I skipped your house, or stories about other places. Like there's a bunch of stuff that I couldn't include just because of for time's sake. So I'm trying to make sure that I have enough time to get through everything. Um, yeah, and so if you're ever interested in some of this stuff, feel free to email me or ask me. I know a lot of people saw this on social media, which is awesome. But I look forward to hearing your questions and even comments after. But like I said, I wish I could tell you about every single haunted place in New Mexico, but that just doesn't work. I don't have the time. It would take it would take me like a 3-hour presentation or 4-hour presentation. And so for time's sake, I'm chopping it down to like probably some of the most well-known ones. And I also went with some of the most haunted. Um, this is family friendly, so I'm not gonna like, I usually show like video and stuff like that because I have more time, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm just gonna kind of talk about some of these things, show you some pictures, things like that. Um, but it's pretty cool to be able to do all of this. And so thank you again for joining. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and we'll get into this. Okay, so first off, I want to say that I'm very skeptical about a lot of different things in regard to the paranormal. or hauntings themselves. And so I've been lucky enough to partake and learn and research about some of these things. But there's some things that I like I said I am skeptical about. So for one thing, this is a photograph that was taken over in by Chama, New Mexico, and this was right after a funeral. So you northern New Mexicans, or you gente from the north, norteños, this is your land, all right? And so here we see this image right here, right? This picture was taken in the early 1940s. Um, I know how cameras work, and so I know that there's things such as light leaks and stuff like that, or imperfections in the connections in the camera lens, you name it. And so there could be a number of things that can cause stuff like this. So there's some things that I'm very skeptical about, but there are some things that I'm like, I don't know how to explain it. It just happens and it's strange, especially now with like digital photography and things like that. It's a little different. The other thing I'm kind of skeptical about is EVP, electronic voice phenomenon. That's where they like put a microphone or like a recorder, like a digital recorder or a tape recorder in the middle of a room that's supposed to be haunted. They're like, "What is your name?" And the ghost, or they say, "Are you a ghost?" And the ghost is always like, "Yes, I'm John," or it's like something like that. Or they'll be like, "Get out." Well, I actually did a project with my students in one of my classes, which I teach an audio production class, and we did that. And so what I did is I went two classrooms down. I had them record in the middle of our haunted room, and I yelled in the other room, "Get out!" And then they went back, boosted the volume up. Lo and behold, what did they pick up? Someone saying get out. And so the light, I mean, sound travels just like light or like water does or air. And so it passes through mediums like air vents and stuff like that. So I'm skeptical about some of those things. However, I have heard some pretty weird stuff that I can't explain and seen video that I can't explain. But this is a good start. So what I'm gonna do is, like I said, this photo is, it's interesting. I always joke around because I'm like, the people are already kind of creepy anyway. Like these things, they kind of look scary already. But this is what the image that everyone was like, oh, look at that. But I don't know. It could be a light leak. It could be a ghost. I don't know. All right. So I'm gonna take you into Albuquerque. If you guys aren't from here or aren't familiar with this place, I think almost everybody I've seen in here is familiar. And so I'm going to take you into Albuquerque, and we're going to go into Old Town Albuquerque, so we can talk about some of these interesting places here um, that are supposedly haunted. All right. So this is a map of Old Town Albuquerque. One thing that's interesting about this is when the settlers first came here, they or Spanish first came to New Mexico. They and especially this area, this is where they settled. And the reason being is that it was really close to the river. The river now is like, like a half a mile away. And so now they're saying that the river was a lot wider than it is now, obviously, especially now that we don't barely get any precipitation. But back then, this was close to the river. So one of the main features in Old Town is this little area right here. It's a gazebo. Everybody knows about the gazebo in Old Town. If you've been to Albuquerque, or you lived here, or visited here, or have family here, and you've been to Old Town, that's the main feature. And then right across the street from it is this place called San Felipe de Neri Church, and that's a Catholic church that's there. Well, all around this was it was a settlement, so there was all these people that lived here, right? And so they built houses, and some of these houses that I'm going to talk about today in this area are from the early 1700s, and they're still used today. And so you're talking, 300 years, more than that, of time these homes have been there. And so these are pretty amazing in itself that those homes can be here still. And so one thing I wanted to plug too, if you're ever here and you ever get an opportunity to go and check out some of the stuff I'm going to share with you today, SGHA, the Southwest Ghost Hunters Association, they do a quality Old Town ghost tour. So if you're ever in town, you want to check it out, go and please do it. It's amazing. Right now, restrictions have caused them not to be able to do it, but once things get clear, I mean, you have to go and check it out because they do some really cool stuff. So I wanted to plug them because some of the stuff that I'm sharing with them is also with you, stuff that they share. All right. So let's go to our first place. So if you're standing in Old Town and you look west, which is this way, you're going to see this building, and it's called La Placita Restaurant. Well, La Placita restaurant was first a home. It was built in 1706 by a rich Ladino. Let me show you a picture of it. Okay, so as you can see, like a lot of times when we're here, we get caught up in this area, this like little storefront area, and we don't notice that in the back there's this. It's this home, right? It's a house. The thing that's crazy is like when they built this house, it was built as a hacienda, so it had a courtyard in the middle. So it was basically built like a U. And then what ended up happening is they closed off one of the ends, and it ends up being like a square. Well, what ended up happening is this family that built this, they were named the Armijos. They came to New Mexico to take care of the land that they had acquired over the years via the Spanish coming in. And so when they came, the father brought his whole family with him, and he had a couple of daughters. And while they were here, um, they ended up getting really sick, and a couple of them passed away. One of them was a teenager, and the other one was an 8-year-old girl, and her name was Victoria Armijo. Well, those are the two spirits that are most active in La Placita. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about them now. But if you look, there's like a tree. It looks like a tree is coming out of the top of the building. That's because the tree is coming out of the top of the building. They have a they enclosed the courtyard, but they left the tree that was in the middle there. And so it's kind of creepy looking too. It's kind of like twisted and stuff when you get to the top. So that in itself is just weird that there's a tree in the middle of the dining room, right? Well, let's talk a little about this. So this is the entryway right here for the blue doors right here is the entryway to get into La Placita. Then you go through this hallway. On the other side of this window is a staircase. It's the original staircase that they brought with them that was hand carved in Spain and brought to Albuquerque in the early 1700s, like I said. Right on the other side of, right on this next window is a dining room, and that's where some of the spirits are also seen. But in between this window and this window here, the window with the staircase and the window to the dining room, there is a busing station, and it has one of those like accordion doors, like the ones that you can move back and forth and slide, and it shuts. And it's to keep the dishes and all that stuff away from so the guests don't see. Well, let's talk about where these young ladies like to hang out. One, the oldest daughter who died of typhus, the younger daughter Victoria died from scarlet fever. She likes to hang out in the dining room. So people will see a girl that looks like she's from like the 1700s, and they're like, it's Old Town Albuquerque. Like people dress weird sometimes over here, and so like sometimes people are like, oh, we saw this lady, and she's not like translucent, or you can't see through her like we see in the movies. Like she looks like a regular person, and some people will say that they can just feel a cold presence in there. Victoria is the most active ghost. That's a little 8-year-old girl. Let me go to the next photo so you can see. So there's that tree, like I told you guys before, just kind of weird. This is that staircase, okay? Up the staircase is the woman's bathroom, a storage room, and an office. Well, those just so happened to be the girls' rooms originally. So one of the most active areas in this place is in the woman's bathroom, which used to be Victoria's room. And so ladies that have been in the restroom say that they'll be in the stalls, and they'll see a little girl run across like this through underneath the stall, like her little feet, and they hear giggling and stuff like that. I've heard other people say that they've been there, and they're washing their hands, and they see a little girl in the reflection, and then they look and she's gone. It's a little girl in a little white dress. um, and so she likes hanging out over here in this area, and then also down here. I have a pretty couple of cool stories. One of my buddies used to volunteer his time with the Southwest Ghost Hunter Association, and he was helping them one day doing stuff. And the guy that was doing the tour was in front of the window where the staircase, where it's on the other side of the wall, is this staircase, or window is a staircase. And he was talking to everybody. Everybody was, his back was to the window, and everybody else was looking into the building. And he said all of a sudden, like, this had just happened a few years ago, so there were people on their cell phones not paying attention. He said all of a sudden I saw them look past me, and then they like trailed up, and then he said, and then they all darted like cockroaches when you turn the light on, right? And he was like, what the hell? So he turned around and looked, and nothing was there. And so he caught up to this couple that kept asking him a couple questions up there before, and the girlfriend's crying, and the dude's like, "We just saw that little girl, Victoria," and she's like, What do you mean?" And he said, "She walked down the stairs when you were telling us the story, and she walked up to the window, smiled at us, and then crawled up the window and then disappeared into the ceiling." And it was pretty crazy. And I remember hearing the story, and I was like, I don't know. Well, I used to dabble in film quite a lot when I was younger. And one day I was working on a independent film that was filming there, and me and one of the other people were doing work with the camera. And so we took it into that. Remember I told you guys about that little busing station with the little accordion door? We took it into there. We started loading the film up. It was dark, so we wanted it to be dark, right? Because we're using 16 millimeter film. And so I loaded it. It was ready to go. And I told the dude that was with me, open the door. And he opened the door, and he like went like he saw something. And I was like, what's up? And he's all, did you see that little girl? And I was like, nah. And he's like, yeah, there was this little girl. And then like I kind of like looked, and around the corner I saw like a little girl in a white dress take off down the hallway, which was like right here. And then I was like, what the hell? This was like 12 o'clock at night, in the middle of the night, midnight. And so we walked around and we were asking people, hey, did you bring your kid with you to work? And they were like, no. And then we ran into the manager who was going to be there all night with us. And we're like, hey, did you bring your kid with you to work? And she's like, no. And we're like, well, she's like, well, why do you ask? And we saw this little girl in a white dress over there. And she's like, oh, you met Victoria. And we're like, who's Victoria? And she's like, she's one of our ghosts. And we were like, and the dude I was with was like, we saw a ghost, man. We saw a ghost. And it was just a really, really eerie feeling after. So all night, I remember like we were there, all of us would be like looking around. And around an hour later, the catering girl went upstairs to use the restroom. She comes out screaming, makes it halfway down the stairs, falls the rest of the way, is like crazy scared. And we're like, what happened? And she's like, I saw this little girl in the bathroom. And we were like, oh, you saw Victoria too. And so that's a personal experience that I had with it. And we've gone there after, and I haven't seen her again, which is I'm bummed, but at the same time I'm also glad. But it's kind of an interesting thing to think about those elements, that was like one time someone's home, and so it makes sense. Yeah, it's haunted. All right. So that's La Placita. Um, I'm gonna move on to the next one. This is Church Street Cafe. So that church I showed you all earlier, this is right behind it on Church Street. Right? How original! Like they came up with come up with Church Street for behind the church. And so Church Street Cafe was originally owned, and actually was built between 1706 and 1709. So this is another one of those buildings that's really old in Old Town. And it's a restaurant, very good restaurant, by the way. I very much enjoy their food, and the setting is really beautiful. Well, this was originally called the Casa de Ruiz, and it was owned by the Ruiz family from when they built it. And so this home was passed on from generation to generation. So basically, it was like a forever home for the Ruiz family. And they are one of the founding families of Albuquerque. So this is how long they've been here, right? Well, in 1992, a young lady from California named Marie Coleman moved to Albuquerque. She wanted to open up a restaurant. Well, so she wanted to find a great place, and she really fell in love with Old Town. So she wanted to do something here. She drove around the properties, asked people. No one was selling. Then she ran into this property and fell in love with it. Well, what she did is she contacted the owner, Mr. Ruiz, and was like, "Hey, I love this property. I'd like to buy it from you because I'd like to make a restaurant." And he's like, "Oh, it's been in our family a long time. I was gonna retire there, all that stuff." And then she's like, "What if I give you this much money?" And she like shows him the number, and he's like, "All right, it's yours. Go for it. You have it." And so he sells it to her. So she goes in there, starts renovating stuff, and starts moving things around. All of a sudden, all kinds of hell breaks loose. She starts hearing this old lady hollering and screaming. There's no one there though. So this old lady ghost is yelling at her, this abuelita, right? Plates are flying across the room. The window breaks. And so she gets so freaked out every day that she's working there trying to get things going that she leaves every night, doesn't lock the door, leaves the lights on and everything. It gets so bad that her the construction workers that are working on it wouldn't go in because they were freaked out. And so what I forgot to skip, I skipped a part two. One of the other things that was kind of interesting that happened is when she was hiring a contractor, she had some guy go in to give her an estimate. Well, when he was in there, all kinds of hell broke loose again. The lady was screaming. Things were flying across the room. All this stuff. They ran out, and Marie was like, "I'm sorry, I think this place is haunted." And the guy's like, "You think so?" And so they start chatting, right? And he's like, "You know what? I think I know what the problem is." And she's like, "What's up?" And he's like, "Well, my great great grandfather or great 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 grandfather used to be with the woman that owned this home, and then he left her for another woman. Well, the ghost that haunts this place her name is Sarah Ruiz, and she was the matriarch of the Ruiz family. And she was cheated on by this dude, and so now his great 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 grandson had to pay for it. And so the agony of a woman scorned, right? So she still was mad at him. And so one thing that was interesting about all of this was that more and more stuff started happening. So Marie ended up hiring a psychic to go in there and do an analysis of it, right? And the psychic goes in and they do that number like, "Oh yes, I feel an evil presence," right? And so they're like, well, she's like, well, what do I do? And she's like, well, the spirit is angry because you're changing everything around. This was her home. This was her family's home. And now you're changing everything around and disrupting it. And she's like, well, what do I do? Marie asks. And the psychic tells her, include her in it. And then when you get here and when you leave, greet her, say goodbye, include her, like make a connection with her. And she's like, I'm not going to talk to no ghost. And so what ended up happening is she ended up doing it. And so every morning she would greet her and say, "Hello, Miss Reese. Thank you for letting us use your place. We're so in love with this area. We're going to make it a beautiful restaurant, all this stuff," right? Well, things start being less crazy in there. Still, stuff still happens, but less, right? And then it's a day when they open up the restaurant, grand opening, right? It's on a Saturday in July, busiest time of the year for Old Town. Things are There's people flooding into the doors. They run out of silverware. Well, all of a sudden, some of the silverware started flying out of the bin, and it was Miss Reese telling them, "Hey, fools, you need to come and wrap some more of this silverware because we have people out there." And so she's become like a helper, a spirit. And so she'll do things like that. One of the crazy things that she does is when the floors need to be mopped or cleaned, she rolls these little pebbles across the ground. They have a jar of them over there, and you can ask them about it if you ever want to go. They're real cool about talking about this stuff over there. And they have these little pebbles. The only place you can find them is on the other side of the Sandia Mountains, where the Ruiz family plot is located. That's the only place you can find them. You can't find those pebbles in the city. So weird stuff, man. So that's Church Street Cafe. This is some. This is a picture of the interior. Just a beautiful place. Very very great food. Next place I'm going to go to is called the High Noon. This is also a restaurant and bar in Old Town, Albuquerque. Um, this place used to be. It was built in the it basically built in the 1785 is when the first structure was built, and then they've made additions since. But originally, it was a saloon. That's what it worked or was used as mostly as a saloon. And this is in the mid to late 1800s. Well, this place is haunted by a couple of spirits. I mean, it's a saloon, so you know some crazy stuff happened down there, especially during the Wild Wild West. You know what I mean? So there's some pretty crazy stuff that happens here. This is a little map. All of those areas that have a red dot are areas where there's some sort of activity. The most common one, and they range from severity, I guess. Like over here in S6 and S8, it's a fire place, but the fireplaces are sealed off, but they emit the sound of a freshly burned fire. And there's no Glade plug-in or anything like that by there, or a candle. The other place is the Santos room and also the gallery dining room. There's a spirit that will whisper in people's ears there. Another one is in the men's bathroom. There's a spirit that haunts in there, and there's no like automatic toilets or sinks and stuff like that. But the toilets will flush by themselves, and then supposedly the spirit in there will pinch you. I don't know how where they pinch you, like if they're trying to get fresh or whatnot. But yeah, supposedly the spirit does that. The most common spirit there that people see is over in S7, S10, and S1. And that is the spirit of this really big cowboy. He's wearing a black duster and a black hat. And what he likes to do, and they go through a lot of cashiers. I actually know the property owner for this place. Awesome person. um he likes to stand over here right in front of the window and look at the hostesses, and he'll just stare at them. And so they go through a lot of hostesses because of that. And so people see that spirit. One of the ones that I thought was pretty cool that I heard from my buddy that helped do the investigation here was at the bar over here in S11. He was helping the bartender put some the you know, have you seen like at Applebee's and Chili's that they have that little like wood thing that you can turn the wine glass upside down and slide it in so it'll hold all the glasses together. Well, they have those there, and he had just helped her put a bunch of those up. And then she asked him if he could help her move this case of whiskey to the back. And I mean, not the back of the building, like the back of the bar, like just turn around and like help her put it down. And so he helped her. Well, when they turned back around, all the wine glasses were back on the bar. He said we were turned around for like 4 or 5 seconds. Like there was no way humanly possible that those all could be taken from there and put back on the counter. So interesting stuff in regard to spirits and stuff like that. There, this is one of the probably the most well known areas of activity in Old Town. Now I'm going to move to another place in Albuquerque, and this is a really high profile one too. This is the Chemo Theater. This is located on Route 66, right, Central and Fifth Street. It was built by it was built in the 1940s by a very famous architect. And what ended up happening is it was used as a theater, like for plays and music and stuff like that, but it was also used as a movie theater. And so it had a lot of people going in and out of there in the especially during the 1950s and 60s. Well, in 1951, um, a really bad accident happened in there, and so they were playing one of those like old school scary movies, like The Wolf Man, and this little boy got scared and he ran out of the theater. Well, while he was running out, the boiler blew up and it killed him and injured several other people. Well, now they say, oh, let me show you this too real quick before I move on. That's a clip from the Albuquerque Journal from when this occurred. The little boy's name was Bobby, and little Bobby died, obviously. Well, after a while, people started seeing a little boy walking around in the theater. And so he would be really active, especially when productions are going on. And so what they did is they made a shrine over by where the boiler was, and when the ceremony, I guess, if you are or routine, if you're having a production there, is you leave a little treat for him, and that could be like a candy or like a little toy or whatever. And this is the actual shrine for him, all right. And you see all these people bring little toys and things like that for him. If you don't do it, he'll mess around with your production. And so like people will be like people that don't give him a little toy or a little candy or whatever, they'll be walking across the stage doing their part and they'll trip over something. One of the ones that I thought was funny was um, the stage hands were trying to clear the stage, and all of a sudden the lights went on by themselves, and they're like holding like a chair and stuff like that. And so they he's really active. One of the craziest stories I've heard was from one of my ex students. She said she was doing a play there, and she was in the basement where the dressing rooms are, and she was listening to her parts because they put them over the speakers down there so you could hear what's going on the stage. Well, she said I heard my part was coming up, so I started walking up these concrete stairs that they have, and she said all of a sudden I felt someone like take my feet out from underneath me and I hit my knees on the concrete stairs. I looked back and nothing was there and I ran up the stairs, she said. She said she ran on the stage. She was like freaked out, but she had to do her part. So she went out, did her little part, and then came off the stage and she was crying. And I was like, for real? And she's like, yeah. And then her mom was like, yup. Like whenever she was on the stage, her little knees were bleeding from when she fell and hit her knees on the concrete. And so I told her, well, did you leave him a little treat or a little toy? And she's like, no. And I was like, well, then you deserve it, fool. All right. So that's one of the spirits that we see also in Albuquerque. I'm going to take you to another place in Albuquerque as well. This is Hotel Park Central. So this is right off of the freeway in Central, off of I-25 in Central. And Hotel Park Central is now this beautiful, like, kind of like, I guess, like you would say, like a ritzy kind of like upgraded hotel. Well, it wasn't built for that. It was built in 1926, and the building was named the Santa Fe Hospital, and it was built for the railroad. So there wasn't a hospital that was really close, and so Santa Fe Hospital was used for to treat people that were close to this area, mostly people that just came off the railroad that were sick or whatever. In the 1940s, it was turned into renamed the AT&SF Hospital, and then later it was purchased by another group where they turned it into just it wasn't it was just called Memorial Hospital. And then Memorial Hospital was then purchased again in the 1980s and turned into a psychiatric hospital or institution. And so, needless to say, a lot of bad stuff happened there. I mean, it's already a hospital, so people pass away and all that in hospitals. But then it was also a psychiatric facility. And this is still when they're in the 1980s. They're still doing things like lobotomies and things like that there as well. Uh, yeah, this place does give me the creeps like crazy, right? You know why? How I know it gives me the creeps? Because I've gone in there before. Because I'm an idiot. All right. So that's a picture of Memorial Hospital. It was boarded up and closed off to the public for a long time. Well, right before they did construction on it, I went ahead and thought it'd be cool to go take a tour around in the day because I wasn't going to go there at night because I'm too much of a chicken to go that far. Um, but I went there. This is a photograph that I took. Kind of interesting stuff. Since then, this has become a really nice, beautiful building. But I asked the construction workers whenever they were working on it. I said, "Well, what's up? Have you guys heard anything like scary?" And they're like, "They won't let us work here at night because it gets all like you hear people screaming in the rooms and all this wild stuff." Yeah, and people like you said, like Rocky Olivas just said, I had a friend stay here, and she said that she had seen a little boy when she stayed the night. Yeah, that's not the first time I've heard that. So there's quite a bit of activity there. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to catch anything that day I went, but people have said like we'll hear spirits, we'll hear people crying, we hear people banging on the doors, and even during the day they said. And so kind of an interesting thing there. You can stay there if you want to. Beautiful hotel now. They have a nice bar on the roof. If you have $200, go for it. Go ahead and stay there the night. Enjoy. All right. So I hit up a few places in Albuquerque. Now I'm going to make my way uh, out of Albuquerque, and I'm going to head into to Santa Fe. Uh, and it's actually right before we get into Santa Fe, the city, right? And so yeah, I bet. And so, like, I just had someone say that their father was a patient there. Yeah, it's crazy in there. All right. The next place I'm taking you to is the New Mexico State Penitentiary. So the New Mexico State Penitentiary had been around. It was built in, I think it was built in the late 1940s, and then they housed prisoners there all the way up until like the 90s, I think it was. And now it's mostly used for like movies and stuff like that. But the thing that was really bad that happened there, I mean, not only it's like prison, right? So like bad stuff happens in prison. And there's a lot of people, I mean, people pass away there. There's a lot of like negative energy attached to that building already to begin with. But then this happened. So in on February 2nd and 3rd of 1980, the New Mexico State Penitentiary had the worst and most violent prison riot in U.S. history. And so the prisoners took over the prison for almost 3 days, and during that time they wreaked havoc all over the place. And one thing that was pretty crazy about it is that they were able to lock down one of the cell blocks before all hell broke loose. and the cell block was cell block 4. Cell block 4 is where they kept all of the snitches. You guys know what snitches are, rats, right? Snitches get stitches, right? And so like um, that's where they kept them. They were able to lock that down before, right when this riot happened, so those prisoners were going to be safe. What happens is later that day, the prisoners that were the rioters got to one of the warehouses, and they got a hold of a welding torch, and they welded their way through cell block 4 and made their way into there to attack several of the prisoners. They were lighting rolls of toilet paper and throwing them into the cell and catching their mattresses on fire. So several inmates burned to death. There were some that were burned to death with the welding torch. And I'm I'm not gonna say more of this because like I like have like I always have a bad feeling when I talk about this one. Um, those are axe marks on the ground, so they got a hold of that stuff too. So it was unfortunate. A lot of people in the cell block lost their lives, and there was a lot of horrible stuff that happened during the riot. Finally, the New Mexico National Guard came in and took control of it. Well, needless to say, after that, and more recently, people have said they've had paranormal activity and stuff like that in the prison. Once again, I did a movie there. It was pretty cool at the time until we had to walk back from working on the set. In order to walk back, we had to pass through the main corridor of the prison. This is like at 3 in the morning after we were done filming, right? We're walking back. I'm pushing this cart. Two cameramen are in front of me. We pass by. I see them pass cell block 4. They pass cell block 4. They look to the side and they just dart running all the way down to the mess hall. And I'm like, oh no. So I start pushing my cart. I get to cell block 4. I look, lights are flickering on and off. I can hear the door slamming, close and shut. I take off. I bolt, right? Stuff flying off the cart. I don't even care. Then I get to the end and I'm like, hey guys, did you see what happened over there? And they're like, yeah, it was crazy. Did you see all the noise and everything? And I was like, yeah. Can you guys help me go get those cables? And they're like, nah, let's go get them tomorrow. And I was like, good idea. And so I didn't go. But after that, I had a really, really bad feeling for like around a month as I worked there. After I worked there, for like a month, I kept feeling like someone was watching me. Even it was at home, and so some of that energy and mal, if you will, came with me, right? And so like I remember like being asleep and I would feel like the presence of someone like staring at me, and it was strange. Well, one of my friends, whose family, his grandfather is a medicine man. I asked him, hey, what's up with this? And he was like, what shoes were you wearing? I was like, wearing my like work shoes. And he was like, where are they at? And I was like, they're in my house. And he's like, you need to get them out. And I was like, all right. And so I took my shoes out right away, threw them outside. Was like, nope, I'm done. Throw them in the trash. I'm gone. And then lo and behold, like the next day, it stopped. I didn't feel that anymore. So we tend to drag that energy. Like I'm going because I teach curanderismo too. So I'm like I'm talking about that energy and stuff like that we carry with us, and it sticks to our feet, especially that negative energy. And so that was one of the other crazy things that I got to experience as one that was there, right? And so they do ghost tours and stuff like that there too, so you can go. They're pretty pricey, just to warn you if anyone's ever interested. Go check it out. They do an awesome job though, and the guides are wonderful. So that's actually one of the most haunted places in New Mexico is the New Mexico State Penitentiary. I forgot to mention that. So now I'm going to go ahead and move on to northeastern New Mexico, and we're going to go to the Plaza Hotel in Las Vegas, New Mexico. So the Plaza Hotel has an interesting story too. Um, and so it was built in 1882. So this is an old hotel, and this is still during the time of the Wild West and stuff like that. So we saw a lot of interesting things there. Um, the owner's name was Brian T. Wells. Well, it just so happens that whenever he took over the hotel, and now the restaurant's named after him, him and his family, he stayed in room 310, and supposedly that was his office. and to this day he haunts that place. And so people will book this room like months out, so they can try to experience what happens in there. I heard several things. I heard that he does anything from like yelling and screaming, but the thing about him, and this is we're going to run into another one in a minute that I'm going to talk about, is he's a poltergeist. So poltergeists can grab you and stuff like that, right? Like they can, their presence is so strong and their anger is so strong that they can grab you and stuff like that. And so he's one of those spirits. So that's Brian T. Wells over at the Plaza Hotel in Las Vegas. They use this hotel in that movie No Country for Old Men, and it's been actually used in quite a few movies, but that's probably the most recent one. And there's a pretty epic like fight scene there with Javier Bardem and Josh Brolin. Great film if you guys ever want to watch that if you haven't. Not for the kids though. All right. Moving along. So now we're gonna head up to south or head down to southeastern New Mexico, and we're going to go to Cloudcroft, New Mexico. Cloudcroft, New Mexico is yeah, and there's a yeah. I'm gonna for sure check that out because I'm sure it is. So Cloudcroft, New Mexico is outside of Alamogordo. So Alamogordo has the Sacramento Mountains. The Sacramento Mountains are where the Cloudcroft is located. So you drive up around 35 miles from Alamogordo, and you could hit Cloudcroft. Beautiful place. Well, it was built as a lumber place where they were getting lumber. And so what they did is all these rich people bought all this land and started having lumberjacks go over there and get the lumber and make profit off of it, right? And so what ended up happening is they were losing money because some of the lumber was being taken, and so what they did is they decided to make sure that they had a way to protect their investment. Well, this dude built the Lodge Hotel, saloon and restaurant there, and that way people that were part of these landowners could go over there and check up on their investment, make sure things are good, right? And so he built that there. Well, what happened is he brought his family with him. This picture of this beautiful redheaded lady. Her name is Rebecca. That was his daughter. Rebecca was very sweet. She was a beautiful young lady. Everybody liked her. She was very friendly. Well, just like we always see in the movies or in stories, she fell in love with one of those dirty lumberjack guys, and he was crazy. And so he used to get real drunk and get real aggressive with her and all this stuff. So her dad told her, "Look, Rebecca, you need to leave him. He's bad news." And she's like, "But I love him, Daddy." And he's like, "I don't care if you don't leave him. I'm gonna have all these other dudes beat the hell out of him or whatever, right?" Well, she goes ahead and goes downstairs to the saloon and breaks up with him, breaks it off with him, right? Well, he loses his mind. He starts trying to attack her, and he runs and chases her out of the bar into the woods, and people are chasing him, trying to find him, and no one ever sees the two again for a little while. So they say that Rebecca died out there and supposedly he killed him, but they never found him again. Well, she started showing up in the hotel again, but it wasn't her, it was her spirit. And so people said, "Well, we see this beautiful redheaded girl and she's walking towards us and she's like, hi," and you tell her hi back, and then she just like disappears into a wall. And so she's a pretty active spirit there. They have some great documentaries of that on YouTube if you ever want to hear about the lodge in more detail. I have a cool a story to tell too. One of my good friend that did work with paranormal activity research there. Um, Him and one of the other volunteers took this photograph, and you see there's like a weird shape in the middle, right? This is the hallway that her bedroom was on. So this room right here to the left was her room, the room where the candlestick, like between the two candlesticks on the wall, that was her room. And so obviously this is like where she's the most active because this is where she spent her time, right? Well, he said he was working with this dude, and he's like a really good look. I've met him before. He's really handsome, real buff. He kind of looks like Ryan Reynolds, like same build and everything. And so he was taking the photos, and that buff guy, the Ryan Reynolds dude, was taking readers with a magnetic field reader to see. And he said, "I saw a peak," and he said we took this picture after, but when I saw the peak, I heard a girl. I felt someone like come up to me, and I heard a girl giggle in my ear and then slap me on my booty. And he, we were like, we started laughing. I'm like, dude, you even get dead chicks. How awesome is that? And so that was their experience there. They didn't get that. This was another investigation they took. This was right on the other side of when you walk going down this hall. If you go down here, there's like a storage, and then the other this way, if you turn right, that goes into more rooms. The storage is you walk down these stairs. They took a photo and they got kind of like these cool orb things on there, which is always like a telltale sign. And these are all with digital photography too. This isn't film, so we can't always say that light leaks and stuff like that cause this. So once again, that's one of those things that we can't explain. Okay, I'm leaving southeastern New Mexico. Like I said, I'm sorry, there's a bunch of other places we could share, but I'm trying to hit up some of the ones that I really know about and that I think are really interesting. The next one we're going to move up to northwestern New Mexico. Northwestern New Mexico has a lot of crazy activity, and we're going to talk about that now. The first one is Dawson Cemetery. So Dawson's in 1913, Dawson was basically a mining town, and in 1913 there was a huge explosion in the mine, and it killed over 250 men that were in the mine. And so it was the worst mining disasters. It was one of the worst mining disasters in American history. Another one happened in 1923 where 123 miners also lost their lives. And so this is the cemetery where most of those individuals are buried or were laid to the rest. And people claim to say that if you're you can see the old mining stuff is still there, but people will be there and they say at night if you go you can see like you remember the lamps that they used to wear on their head, on their helmet, right? The little helmet lamps, you could see them around the cemetery and on some of the equipment still at night, which is pretty cool. I've been there just once and I never saw anything like that, but it was during the day. But kind of an interesting thing. And so that's Dawson Cemetery. Ooh, St. James Hotel. St. James is interesting. It was built in the 1850s, and it was probably the most famous hotel in New Mexico during the Wild West. So it was the thing that's crazy about it is this is what it was, all right? So when they built it, it was a hotel, a casino, a saloon, and a brothel all in one. So that's like a outlaw's paradise, right? And so of course they had all these rough people going through, anybody from Billy the Kid to Doc Holliday, even famous lawmen like Wyatt Earp, people like that stayed in this hotel. Well, it's so crazy that when they built this, they knew that it was going to bring a rambunctious crowd. So between the two floors, the wood that they used to build the second floor on top of is like 16 inches wide. So that's like this, right? So they built it really wide because in the saloon, these dudes would be shooting at the roof with their guns, and it wouldn't go through the boards in the bottom to get to the second floor. So this is in Cimarron. I forgot to mention that. Yeah, it is an interesting place. The most haunted area in there is room 18. That's this picture you have here. Let me move this out of my way so I can see it too, because I just like to see it as well. Okay, so that's room 18. Room 18 is very famous because it's haunted by a spirit named TJ Wright. TJ Wright was an outlaw. He killed several men. And then what he ended up doing is he ended up making room 18 his home, and so he stayed at the St. James Hotel room year round. But he liked to he was real travieso. He liked to fight, right? And so he liked to bug people. And so what he did is he worked in the casino and he dealt cards. Um, but he played most of the time. He wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna be the dealer today. Like he played like he wasn't the dealer. He just that's what he did. He ran that table. Well, one day he was playing and he cheated, and this guy caught him, and the dude told him, yo. Well, he probably didn't say that because this is in the Wild West, right? But he was like, hey, I just saw you cheat, TJ, and he's like, I didn't cheat. And he's like, yeah, you did. He's like, so you're calling me a cheater? And he's like, you damn right. And he said, well, what are you gonna do about it? And that dude told him, don't worry, TJ, by the end of the night, I'm going to kill you. So TJ goes on playing, yeah, whatever, kid, and keeps playing and stuff like that. He gets all wasted, walks up to his room. He starts trying to open the door to room 18. And then he hears someone say, "Hey, TJ." He turns around and it was that dude that he cheated cards with, and that guy told him good night, and he shot him 4 times in the chest and killed him in his doorstep of room 18. Well, now TJ haunts that room. If you look, you can't stay in that room. It's locked by management. You can't go in there. Only people that are there can go. He's a poltergeist, so he can grab you. I've heard of stories of people that have stayed in there in the past. Where he'll grab you the bed and shake it while you're sleeping, and he'll slap you and hit you and stuff like that. So he's a poltergeist. So he's a very evil spirit. Um, and so that's St. James. There's a bunch of other stuff too. People see like spirits and stuff like that walking around, and they hear noises. They hear partying a lot, like in the room next to them, and then there's like no one in there. So it's a pretty interesting place, and you can still stay there to this date. Oh, let's not forget Highway 666. Right? So this is in the northwestern part of New Mexico. It goes basically from Farmington all the way to Gallup. It is now changed. I think they changed it to like 492 or something like that because it freaked people out because it was 666. But there's a few things that people have claimed to have seen there. One of them, people will be driving down Highway 666 and they claim to see either an old lady or a young lady hitchhiking on the side of the road. The one that freaks me out all the time, and I've heard several people tell me they've actually seen this, is that if you don't pick her up, the old lady, it's 75 miles an hour speed limit to there. All right, even when it was not, it was 55. Um, that if you don't pick her up, she'll start running alongside your car, and you're going 75 miles an hour. So really creepy. The other one is like people say they see like a girl from like the 60s, like a hippie looking girl, hitchhiking too, and you'll give her a ride, and then you'll drop her off at one point, and then you'll go further, and you'll see her again. The other one, and some of these are attached to like kind of like the folklore. So like I've never really heard like too crazy stuff. I've heard a few that were like, oh man, like that's pretty trippy, and the people are like shaking while they're telling you, and you're like, yeah, that probably really happened to them, or they were like really drunk or something. The other thing is like these people will see a black truck, start chasing them and try to run them off the road. I put the one from Jeepers Creepers just because like I don't know, it looks kind of scary. So but this is a photo of the road where you have to cross a railroad track, and someone caught a kind of interesting photo there. This was a digital camera as well. Okay, so that was Highway 666. One of the other most haunted places in New Mexico is this next place. It's called Urraca Mesa. It's over in the northwestern part of New Mexico. Um, the Boy Scouts of America has like a camping area pretty close to it. I can't remember the name of it. Maybe someone, if they can, type it in the chat. But if you look, it's like a really flat mesa, but it has a really interesting story. So you guys heard of the Anasazi, right? The ancient ones, right? The ancient Native American group from the Southwest. The basket makers came from them. So like the Pueblo people and the Mogollon. Um, well, what ended up happening is the Anasazi had a battle with the spirits of the spirit world, and one of their shaman gave his life to close a gate that is there where the spirits can come in and out. And it's not like the good spirit world, it's like the bad one. Well, in order for that to that gate to maintain closed, they put these cat totems there, and there was 4 of them. Well, once those totems are gone, the gateway can open again. Well, being the idiots that we are, people take them, and so now there's only one left. Just to warn you. So we need to make sure that cat totem stays there. Uh, I have a pretty crazy picture. This kind of stuff is not normal. That's the top of Huraca Mesa during a lightning storm. They say it's really rich in a lot of minerals, and that's why lightning tends to hit it more frequently than other places. But to me, that's just weird. Like that's just weird that like how come all this lightning's hitting it all the time? I don't know. Something tells me like a little bit different than that. The thing that I hear most about people that will stay in this area is they'll hear when they're camping, they'll hear voices, and they'll hear like large animals walking around. It sounds like that, and growling. One of my ex students who is an ultralight backpacker person camper. I told him this story when he was in one of my classes, and so he, him and his family decided to do it. And then he went and did it again when he was a little bit older, and he said, Noriega, I heard like the whole night I was there, I heard growling right by my tent. The whole night. Like I couldn't even sleep. He said, and I kept putting my light out and seeing if there was like a wolf or like a coyote or something like that. And he's like, nope, there was nothing there. And then the whole day, next day, I hiked up to the top of the mesa, and he said the whole time I felt like someone was following me, and I kept hearing growling. And so that's just one account that I've heard of. The other thing that's kind of crazy about it is, if you take an aerial photo and you look at it, the mesa looks like a skull. So you can see that, like, there's the skull, there's the back, there's like the chin, and then there's where the eyes would be, right? That's where the cat totems are located there. This is another aerial photo of it. So this is a topographic map of it, and then this is the actual photo. So pretty weird. I thought that was pretty amazing whenever I learned about it. Like, oh man, it's a skull. Pretty trippy. So those are some of the. This is one of the most haunted places. So people, like, I've heard several people that have gone camping there hear stuff and feel like a presence when they're hiking and stuff like that. And that part of the state is interesting because there's a lot of activity there. I know I'm running low on time. I'm actually over what I wanted, but we'll keep going because I want to share a couple more things with y'all. So those are some of the paranormal activity and stuff like that that's around New Mexico. Now I'm going to get into a little bit of the folklore. So sharing that part of it's important too, because we have a lot of interesting folklore here in New Mexico that even transfers over to other places. And that's why I say it's folklore, because like when we hear some of these things, it's also we hear about it other places around the world. Okay, and so the first thing I want to talk about with New Mexico folklore is El Chupacabra. Yes, we have them too here. Okay, supposedly the goat sucker, right? El Chupacabra. He lives here and he likes to eat goats and cattle, um, and suck out their blood. Have we ever caught one or really seen one? No. El chupacabra is all over Central America, all over South America. We've even had examples of it in other places around the world, like in New Zealand and stuff like that. Very similar um, uh, stories. Okay. The next one is kind of interesting too, and I've heard a couple of cool stories about this. Um, is witches, right? We always hear about brujas and stuff like that. Like the late awesome Rudolfo Anaya did a wonderful pieces of literature that brought a lot of this to life for us, to share this folklore and stuff like that in it globally, right? And so rest in peace, Rudolfo. But he also brought it up to people to freak people out too, and so we have several different stories. Um, that are all over the world, basically. And so brujas are legends that live all over, and we hear a lot of different stories about brujas throughout the globe, if you will, right? And so in New Mexico, we have quite a few. One of the ones that people will talk about a lot is like vampire witches, and so basically they're witches that uh, uh, suck the blood out of humans, but mostly men and babies. I don't know if any of you guys have heard that, but that's a pretty common uh, um, piece of folklore that's around the world. So witches exist all over the place. There, you can't go to any culture without them having some sort of story about witches. The one that's crazy too is we have lechuza, or like we call it like tecolote, the owl, right? So witches can turn into an owl or something that's in between, right? And so we always hear there's several different variations of the story. I've actually heard the story from even like people like my father-in-law, my grandmother. There's all these different stories that tell me like, yeah, this witch was chasing us and she was a bird, and then we shot the bird, and then the next day that witch was dead. Like I said, I've heard like around 8 different variations of that story. So once again, a good example of folklore. And this was passed on, and we get a lot of that same thing in native traditions of the Southwest, and then also in Central America, and even into South America and in other places around the world too. Um, uh, Witches turning into birds is a really normal thing. You go to you go to the United Kingdom, they're there too. So once again, this is a kind of crazy picture too. It's like this person from Mexico caught a witch in flight, transforming into a bird. Is it real? And I always think it's funny because those pictures that they always share, it's always blurry as hell, like the Yeti, like Bigfoot, right? So it's like, well, how come did you not focus? No, I tried, but it was fast, you know. So that's another folklore that we have in New Mexico is the brujas, right, of witches, and there's an interesting element to that in our culture, and brujas are really big. Like we think about that often here in New Mexico, with anything from brujeria or being cursed, right? And so there's a lot of stories, even like collecting family stories. I hear that a lot. The witch lights, that's another one. So people will claim to say that the witches will um, carry these lights with them so people know that that's a witch coming. And so in New Mexico, we have this tradition where it's like this glowing light, and there's some of them are green, and sometimes they're red, sometimes they're blue, and supposedly those are witches, right? Um, we're not the only ones that have that story. Even in Africa, some of the countries there have the same story, and also in the United Kingdom. And so a lot of those stories are like I said, are pieces of folklore. These are things that were passed on during colonialism and stuff like that. So I have to talk about that too, because that was a lot of stuff that was passed around was during those time periods. Um, and so originally they thought it was like, people said it was like the witches that were carrying these lamps or fire pots, and that's why they glowed like that. More of a European lore, the Witchers would ride on brooms, right? And they would have a candle or lantern in their bosom and on their chest, so they could be seen. And so everyone would be like, "Oh, no, I'm not going out there because the witch is out there," right? Think about that. Like we use that often in our culture to make sure people don't go out after night, after dark. The dog man of New Mexico. It's not the werewolf, it's the dog man. All right. There's several different stories that I've heard of the dog man of New Mexico. But one of the interesting ones was in the East Mountains of Albuquerque area, like Moriarty and Edgewood and those places, that they have a werewolf, and he goes and he eats people. There was even my I was talking to my abuelita about it, and she was like telling me stories, and my mom was sharing stories with me that she heard of that wolf man, or dog man. And so and even in south eastern New Mexico, or there by Edie County, there's also the dog man of Edie County, where people have seen this wolf man, if you will. The wolf man is all over the place. So we have wolfmen in Ireland and in Germany. Those are like actually one of the areas where they think the story started. New Zealand, Russia, etc. It's all over the place. So werewolves or dogmen have always been a part of folklore um, throughout the world. Um, Probably one of my favorite though. Maybe just because I'm like furry like them, so it makes me feel like I'm connected. The Death Waltz. This is another one that I've heard a few times, but it's really interesting every time I hear it. Supposedly at Fort Union, this is in the late 1800s. Um, this lieutenant named Johnny. That's all everybody's like, his name was John or Johnny. Well, Lieutenant John, not Lieutenant Dan, Lieutenant John, uh, uh, was stationed there in Fort Union. Well, what happened is the captain brought his sister-in-law to Fort Union to live with them. Well, her name was Celia, and what ended up happening is Celia and John fell in love with each other, but he's a soldier and he was the she was the captain's sister-in-law, right? And so they were reluctant. There was a lot of reluctancy from other people for them to be together, but they wanted to be together. Well, he ended up being called to duty because there was some Apache raids that they wanted him to go and check out. Well, during one of the before he left, when they were saying goodbye and he was professing his love for her as he left, he told her, "That's well, nobody else shall have you. I will come back and make any claim." That was a direct quote. Um, and so she basically promised him that she would wait for him. Well, he died, and a while went by, and she met somebody else, and she got married. And on her wedding night, she was doing her dance, her waltz with her husband, and all of a sudden, John showed up, and he walked across the dance floor, grabbed her, and she freaks out, right? Because he's dead, and he starts dancing with her and dancing with her, and then he lets her go, and she just falls to the ground, and she passes. And supposedly the story is that he came back for her, and since he was gonna go, he was gonna take her soul with him because, um, you know, she promised, right? So that's the death waltz. This a similar story exists in the United Kingdom. We also have one in from Salamanca, Spain, and we have also heard similar stories throughout other places in Europe, um, particularly one in Greece that's very similar. So once again, it's another example of folklore that was passed on um, during colonization and the spread of empires. Okay, the next one, Devil at the Dance. This is another one, right? There's several different stories. The ones that I always love are the ones where this is how it starts, all right? Many years ago, local communities used to have these dances, right, for the youth. Well, one night of these dances, against her parents' wishes, during Lent, this young lady dressed up in a beautiful dress and snuck out of her house to attend the dance. And like I said, it's always during Lent, like I told you before. Okay. When the girl arrived at the dance, it was in full swing. People were dancing and having a great time. From across the room, the girl noticed this handsome young man, and she watched every woman in the dance with him, with this handsome stranger, right? Eventually, he came across and asked her to dance. She joined him, and they danced around. And he was spinning her around fast, and then he stopped, and she was like kind of dizzy. And then she got her senses and stared into his eyes. And then she looked down at his feet, and his feet were that of a large chicken. And so that's where we get these pictures here, like this and this. We've also heard some where they have hooves, like goat hooves, and supposedly she danced with the devil that night. This is a really interesting story because we hear this all over the Southwest, even into Oklahoma, Texas, obviously. We've heard this in Mexico. The most recent sighting of the chicken feet dancing guy was here at, and this picture in the bottom, at El Camaroncito. It's a dance hall and bar in San Antonio, Texas. So you people from San Antonio, go check it out and let me know if you see the chicken feet guy. All right, but that's another example of folklore. So we've heard this in a lot of different places. All right, and last but not least, La Llorona. Everybody knows the story of La Llorona. Um, she's the wailing woman, right? The woman who is in search for her hijos, right? Mis hijos. Like we hear that story. I remember like people like I remember like my aunts and stuff like that, or my sister doing it to scare me when I was a kid. Mis hijos, and she's looking for her children, right? Because she had to kill her children because they were gonna take them from her. There was no way she was gonna let that happen. And so La Llorona is an interesting story. In New Mexico, we have our own variation of La Llorona. It's very similar to the other stories that we've heard around the Southwest. So you hear about the Llorona in Arizona, you hear about the Llorona in Texas, you hear about the Llorona in California and other places like that. In Mexico, there's the Llorona. In South America, Llorona. Um, there's a Llorona in Puerto Rico. Um, and so the story came along with the Spanish, but there was also a story here in Mesoamerica before contact happened that was very similar. Then there was also stories in other places around the world. In Ireland, they have the Banshee, which is the Llorona. So she's this wailing woman that's crying and screaming for her children, and if she catches you, she takes you away. I don't know where she takes you to her house. Maybe she has like food or something ready for you, but I don't know. They've actually had a couple of TV shows do this, discuss this. They recently made a movie La Llorona. There's songs. I played a song for you earlier. But this also happens in Scotland too, and there's other variations of the story in the Americas and in all over the Americas and in Europe, all over the place. There's one in Greece too, a wailing woman. And there's also a couple of different wailing woman stories in places like Nigeria, Ethiopia, in the continent of Africa. Once again, this is another piece of folklore. Was it real? I don't know. But I do have a pretty funny story about the explanation of La Llorona. I'm gonna bust out with the story that my father-in-law told me growing up in Rainsville, New Mexico, which is right outside of Mora in northern New Mexico. And what he did is he was one of those dudes. He was like that girl earlier that danced with the chicken feet guy because he would like sneak out or leave to go to these dances that were in Mora. And while he was there, he would have a good old time, but then he had to walk back to Rainsville, which is not close. It's like a few miles away. And he would have to go in the night, like after midnight, right? And so he would walk, and he told me I would always walk along this little creek that we have there, or little river, right? And he said, every time I'd be walking through there, I'd hear the Llorona crying, "Ah," and screaming, ah. And then he said, I would take off running as fast as I could home because I thought the Llorona was going to get me. He said, well, one day I was walking back from one of those dances and I heard the Llorona. Well, I was running away and I was running on the road and all of a sudden I saw lights, like a car coming. And he said, I waved down the car, La Llorona. And this old man was like, ¿Qué pasó, pendejo? And he was like, La Llorona, La Llorona. And so the old man started laughing and he said, get in the car, get in the truck. So my father-in-law got in the truck and was in the passenger seat. So I was like freaked out and I heard her, he's like, I heard her crying. And the old man told him, so you heard the Llorona, huh? And he's like, yeah, over there by the river. And he's like, well, you want to see her? I'm going to take you to see her. And so he put the truck in gear and he started driving towards the river, like through the pasture, right? Through the pastura. And he's driving through it and he's holding my father-in-law. So my father-in-law can't get out of the car. And so he drives up and he has his lights off and he says, you want to see the Llorona? Well, here she is. And he turns the lights on and he said all of a sudden he saw these little foxes jumping and taking off and you hear them and they're like screaming. And if you ever heard, we have kit foxes and red foxes up there, and if you ever want to hear one of them scream, go on YouTube and look it up. It sounds like a lady screaming. And so after that I wasn't that scared, but I still kind of was. And so that's one of the explanations we have for the Llorona here. um yeah, so like we have Bree talking about hearing the Llorona, or her grandfather hearing the Llorona. Um, yeah, we hear a bunch of different stuff like that in regard to these stories about folklore in New Mexico. Um, and that's where we are. I'm gonna stop there. This was some of the folklore. Obviously, like I couldn't go over everything. There's a couple of other like really great stories, and I'm actually thinking about trying to start something to share, maybe like a podcast or a YouTube channel where I can share more of these. And I've already started like coordinating things so I can do it almost like lore, but more Latino, right? More Chicano, if you will. So talking about these other stories that we hear about in our culture. Um, if anybody has, first off, thanks for joining. If you have questions or comments, I'm opening it up now. You can go ahead and unmute yourself and ask a question or make a comment. I know some of y'all posted in the chat, and that's cool too. Um, but yeah, if any of you want to ask a question or anything, now's the time.
Hey Noriega, it's Rocky.
Hi, Rocky.
So I had a question about sleepwalkers and whether that is a folklore that is tied to New Mexico or if it's more of a generalized one.
Um, the sleepwalkers or skinwalkers?
Skinwalkers, there you go.
Skinwalkers is a native um, piece of folklore or history, but it's also something that we hear about in other groups too. So there's a lot of that too, like where like even with the witches, the brujas, that they can shapeshift, and in between an owl or a bird, right? There's also one from Norway and Finland where a man can turn into a bird, a raven. um it's so for me it's kind of like more folklore. Although I have heard some pretty crazy stories about it, um but in general, like I think a lot of times we run into that whole thing of it being a piece of folklore. Thanks
Okay,
for
awesome.
asking that
Thank you.
question.
Yeah, I had read a couple of really good stories and it just kind of got me really curious.
Yeah, awesome. Cool, thank you for asking. But once again, thank you all for joining. These are the groups
Oh,
that contributed to this. Oh, hold on, go ahead.
oh,
You have
I
a
have
question?
one question. Are you know how you talked about absorbing energy and spirit and
Yeah.
carrying it home? Do you ever
Yes.
worry about visiting these places and going back home?
Oh yes, every time I do. And you know what I do every time? I leave my shoes outside and I make sure to smudge myself. And I usually do that before I even go back to my home because I don't want to bring that. Even tonight, like I'm gonna take care of this place where I'm at now, and then my shoes are out, man. I'm not keeping them with me, because even though I'm not there, I'm still invoking some of that energy, and so I want to make sure that I'm all right and I'm not bringing that with me at all. That's a good question. Thank you, Dr. Vasquez.
Hey,
Yeah, lots
Hito,
of
it's
holy water.
Ants.
What's up, brother?
What's going on, my man? So
Not
don't you
much.
think, so don't you think like, the whole invoking thing or like how you said you leave your shoes, whatever.
Yeah.
But don't you find like some sort of energies as far as like feeling like family members that have passed
Mm.
you know what I'm
Yeah, yeah,
getting
yeah,
at?
yeah. I know what you're getting at.
Don't you find that inviting? Like
Yeah,
that, like,
yeah, for sure. And I think like with our senses that we have, especially us as especially I like bringing up people in the Southwest because we tend to do that a lot more than other people. And I think yeah we do it, but there's this feeling that we have of that connection, and so that energy, we can tell if it's positive or a negative energy, right? And so that's one thing that's kind of cool about it. Like I always like, I don't know how you guys are, and a lot of people do this, but like when I'm having a hard time or I'm going through something that's difficult, a lot of times I ask for like my ancestors to help me, right? And I can feel it sometimes where I'm like, I think that just happened because of this, you know what I mean? And that's a sense that we can make that's positive, right? Or connect with that's positive. But at the same time, there's also those negative energies. Just like with balance in the world, it's all there in regard to energy too. And we sense it. Like us humans are pretty interesting creatures, and we have this sense that allows us to feel that. And like I give that example, like where you feel like someone's watching you and it's not good, that's a bad energy. You know what I mean? But if you're like, man, I feel like the presence of my abuelita, or I feel the presence of my father, or whatever. That's a whole other story. So I'm all for having them on our side, like especially now, like during Dia de los Muertos and stuff like that. We're gonna see hopefully feel that positive presence with us. Thanks for
You got to
answering that.
ask. You got to ask Van Tate about the base, like some of the places, the buildings
Oh
we
yeah,
work in. I don't know if you ever heard
for
of any of
sure.
the
Yeah,
stories that we
I
used
think
to tell about that place.
he told me. I think you told me a couple of them, but yeah, I'd love to get that down so I can include it in things in the future.
Yeah, yeah.
Thanks, bro.
Well, thanks for
Appreciate it.
answering the question, brother.
Yeah. All right. So once again, thank you for joining me. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Um, these are some of the groups that support this and support me in being able to do things like this for the community. ECA Dream Team, go and follow us on Instagram. Career Research Center Ethnic Studies Department, that's me, right? And then University of Mexico Chicana and Chicano Studies. Thank you all for being a part of this and for joining us and all the support. Everybody have a beautiful evening, a beautiful night. Be safe, and keep the spooky stories alive. Thank you. If you have questions, I'll stick around too.
All right, Hito. So
Good,
tell
Tino.
us. Oh,
Go ahead. Hey,
What's up?
my son Charlie has a question for you.
All right, go for it.
How many of these stories do you think are true?
Um, I don't know. I mean, there's like I said, in New Mexico, there's so many, but some of the ones that I shared today are ones that are I can't explain and that like I've had experiences at too. And so I think a lot of them are true, especially some of the ones that we have close that I talk to, but not now. Don't be freaked out like that. Not all of them are going to be like, oh, it's this evil spirit's going to get you. No, it's not like that. But we've had people
No.
that have some of these experiences. So
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
thanks.
you.
Thank you for the question. Nice seeing you, Charisse.
Bye. It's good to see you.
Bye.
all right, Hito. So what about any personal stories, like stuff, like especially like I know like when my grandfather passed away.
Mhm.
It was maybe like a couple weeks after, somewhere around there, and I
Mhm.
was driving in my work van, and for some reason, like just out of nowhere, I could smell his pipe tobacco,
Oh
like
yeah.
really, really
Mhm.
strong.
Yeah.
And I know Gus had just passed
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
And was there anything like that happened or anything where he kind of told you, hey, he's still there, like
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure. Yeah, I get that every now and then with my dad, especially like where I'm in his like space where he was really like really loved. I like my dad has this beautiful backyard, and those of you that know and have been here, and he loved it. He loved being involved in his totally involved in his backyard, especially like I mean he made a church like a little he turned his shed into like a little mission church, and he has a beautiful horno and a pond and all this crazy stuff. But he loved feeding hummingbirds. That was one of his favorite things, is to watch him in the morning when he was drinking his coffee and stuff like that. And so during the summer, I'd be back there, and there was this, and my sister can account for this too because she saw the same thing. Uh, was there was this hummingbird that wouldn't let anyone else drink the water, and he was like a little travieso, like a little firecracker, and he would like chase people off. And like to me, like in Aztec tradition, when warriors fall, they become hummingbirds, and that's my dad, so for sure that is an example of that for me with my pops. Um, so yeah, it's kind of an interesting thing. One of the other ones that I had that was pretty trippy was when I was in sixth grade. I was really close to an aunt on my father's side. Her name was Bertha, and she died from lung cancer. When we were where we were living at the time, is we were living in a one bedroom apartment with a study, and my dad had stuff in there, so I slept on the couch, and they had this rocking chair that my aunt had given my parents. Well, the night she passed away, I had just laid down to sleep. They had just called us and said she's probably not going to make it through the night. I was sitting there and laying in bed. I had just put my head down, and then I heard the rocking chair moving, and I was like, "My mom back in here?" And I looked up. I saw my aunt Bertha in there sitting rocking in that rocking chair. She smiled at me, and then she just kind of faded away, which is like weird. And so like I even like had to like smack myself a little bit to be like, is this real? You know, and like I still don't know if like I really saw that or it was just like intuition. Um, but after around a little while later, we got a call and saying that she had passed away. And I had screamed and stuff like that. So my parents had heard me say that. I saw Tia Bertha, and my mom knew about it too. So yeah, like I think like those things are part of our experiences as humans. Like we see that stuff. Sometimes we like don't want to recognize it, but it happens. Um,
It- just to add one thing,
yeah.
when you did the whole mis
Oh
hijos,
yeah.
that reminded me of your dad so much because I remember one Halloween we were in the backyard and he was sitting there and he told us the story. Like
Oh
he just
yeah.
wanted to tell us the story. We were just sitting right there and
Hmm.
overlooking out on the into the backyard, because your dad
Hmm.
liked being in the
Oh
backyard.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
that was just like when you did that, bro, it sounded exactly ants. Let me tell you a story. It's just,
Right.
yeah.
Thank
That was
you.
awesome.
Thanks, man.
That was
Appreciate
awesome.
it. Thank you. Do we have any more questions?
Noriega, did you already talk about the Exorcist movie and your roommate?
No, no, no. It wasn't my roommate. It was my
Oh,
brother.
okay.
It was my brother-in-law's roommate. No,
I
but I,
got you.
I
I
can
got you.
share that real quick. That one scares the shit out of me, by the
It's
way.
good. Yeah, same.
Uh, sorry, I didn't mean to cuss. My bad. But it does. It scares me quite a bit when I tell the story. So, my brother-in-law had a good friend that was really enthralled and fascinated with the film The Exorcist. And so what he liked to do is he would watch it like all the time. Well, what ended up happening is, unfortunately, he ended up committing suicide. And when they found him, that movie was on, and so it was just like this really terrible thing, right? Well, my brother-in-law kept that movie, the VHS tape of it, and so one one day we used to throw a Halloween party for my other brother-in-law all the time at our house, and we were having this party and we thought let's put that Exorcist movie in because my wife somehow got a hold of it and put it in and then we'll play it while people are here, right? And so we did that. Well, that night I swear it was like really windy that night and like knocking stuff down windy, like like a few months back when it was like all crazy windy over here, like that. And I kept hearing something outside, and so me and my wife didn't sleep a wink. I went outside because I kept hearing somebody knocking, and no one would be there. And so I was like, some kids in our neighborhood bugging on us or something. Next morning, I wake up, all the tires in my car are slashed, in all both of our cars. And so I was like, went grabbed that tape from the VHS tape player, got through my dad actually came and picked me up and dropped off a car to me because we needed to get our tires fixed. And then I drove it to the church that's closest to our house and threw it in the dumpster there, and then left and never tried to think about it ever again. But yeah, it was a trip, man. Like that night was just not normal at all, and a lot of it was like, I always like this saying from, I don't know if you guys know Jedi Mind Tricks. It's a hip hop group, but one of their songs, Razorblade Salvation, says, "You keep messing around with darkness, you're the one who's losing." That's like straight up what happened. Like I messed around with it, and I got what I deserved that night. Thanks for asking that, Carlos.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of my favorite stories. I'll bring it up every once in a while.
Thanks, dude. Anybody
That's why
else?
you don't bring the Ouija board home.
No way. Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do stiff as a board.
Oh,
Anybody else have questions, comments? Well, Bernadette says, I feel like my husband is someone who invites spirits, good and bad. Why do you think certain people are able to do that? I think when you're more open to it and you're aware of that, then that's going to be the case. And I feel that as one of those people that kind of does that too, I'm more prone to being like maybe ants too, is like that's part of like being the person we are. We are open to those things, and so sometimes we get the positive and sometimes we get the negative. And obviously,
That's why
like when
we
you're,
should never go camping, bro.
yeah, yep, especially over in Uraka Mesa, because that won't be fun.
Yeah.
We're gonna hear some growling and some other stuff too that won't be interesting for us, and it won't be Levon snoring, or our version of,
Marcilos.
yeah, or our version of El Chupacabra.
Yeah.
Anybody else? All right. Well, thank you all for joining me. I hope you had a nice experience. Be safe out there. Thank you. Watch out for the dog man for sure, because you don't want to get bit by him, because then you're going to turn into a dog man, and then we'll have to get you with the silver bullet. All right. But thank you for joining me. Have a great Halloween, and have a nice Dia de los Muertos. Blessings to you all. Thank you.
Bueno, much love, brother.
Later, bro. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Annalena, do you have a question? Sienna, do you have a question? Or is that like Francisco? All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining. You have a beautiful evening.